Imagine this for a moment. You pray, you confess, you try to live right, but deep inside, one question quietly bothers you. Did what I just do separate me from God or not? Most Catholics never get a clear answer to this. They only hear words like mortal sin and venial sin. But nobody explains what that actually means for your soul. This video is not to scare you, it's to finally remove confusion. Because the difference between mortal and venial sin is not small. It determines whether grace is wounded or completely lost, and very few people explain it simply. Part 1. Why this confusion exists at all. Let's start with an honest question. Why do so many Catholics fear sin, but don't understand it? Because growing up, most of us were told, this is a sin, that is a big sin. Go to confession. But no one explained how sin actually affects your relationship with God. The Church does not treat all sins the same. Scripture does not treat all sins the same. Even the Bible itself says, there is sin which is mortal, and sin which is not mortal. 1 John 5:16-17. So the question is not, is sin serious? The real question is, when does sin destroy grace, and when does it weaken it? Part 2. What is mortal sin? Plain and clear. Let's remove fear and define it properly. A mortal sin is a sin that kills spiritual life in the soul. The word mortal literally means death. A mortal sin breaks your relationship with God completely, not emotionally, but spiritually. For a sin to be mortal, 3 conditions must exist together. 1. Grave matter. The act itself must be serious. Examples: sexual sin, outside marriage, adultery, serious dishonesty, blasphemy, missing Mass deliberately, hatred that you willingly hold on to. Not every mistake is grave matter. 2. Full knowledge. You know it is seriously wrong, not I had a vague feeling, but I know the Church teaches this is serious, and I choose it anyway. Ignorance can reduce guilt. God judges knowledge honestly, not harshly. 3. Deliberate consent. You freely choose it, not forced, not panicked, not confused beyond control. A calm decision. If even one of these 3 is missing, it is not a mortal sin. This is where many Catholics suffer unnecessarily. Part 3. What mortal sin actually does to the soul. Here is the truth most people avoid saying clearly. Mortal sin removes sanctifying grace. That does not mean God stops loving you, God abandons you. It means you have stepped away from God's life within you, like cutting a branch from a tree. The tree is still there. The branch can return. But life is no longer flowing until reconciliation happens. This is why confession is required, not as punishment, but as restoration. Part 4. What is venial sin, and why it still matters? Now let's talk about venial sin, the one people either ignore completely or worry about too much. A venial sin wounds your relationship with God, but does not destroy it. Grace is weakened, not lost. Examples: impatience, minor dishonesty, gossip, coldness in prayer, small acts of selfishness. Venial sin does not cut you off from God, but it makes your heart less sensitive to Him. Think of it like dust on a window. Light still enters, just not clearly. Part 5. Why venial sin is dangerous. If ignored. Most Catholics hear the word venial and unconsciously translate it as not serious. That is where the problem begins. Venial sin is not spiritually harmless. It does not destroy grace, but it weakens the soul's resistance to sin. Think about how habits form. No one suddenly commits a grave sin out of nowhere. It almost always begins with small compromises, repeated excuses, quiet justifications. Venial sin slowly trains the conscience to tolerate disorder. A person does not wake up one day disconnected from God. They drift gradually. This is why the Church warns against deliberately remaining in venial sin. Not because God is strict, but because the human heart becomes less sensitive with repetition. St. John Paul II explained that venial sin clouds judgment, weakens charity, dulls awareness of God. Over time, prayer feels dry. Confession feels unnecessary. Mortal sin no longer feels shocking. This is not punishment. It is spiritual cause and effect. Venial sin is like repeatedly ignoring pain signals. Eventually, serious injury feels normal. That is why saints took venial sin seriously, not out of fear, but because they understood where it leads. Part 6. Common questions. Catholics ask, answered simply, if I die with venial sin, am I lost? No. Venial sin does not separate you from God, but purification may still be needed. Do I need confession for venial sins? Not strictly, but confession heals, strengthens, trains conscience. That's why the Church encourages it. What if I'm unsure whether a sin was mortal? God does not trap sincere souls. If there is honest doubt, it is usually not mortal. Confess calmly, trust God's mercy. Scrupulosity is not holiness. Part 7. Why this teaching is actually hopeful. At first glance, the Church's teaching on sin sounds heavy. But when understood correctly, it is actually one of the most hopeful teachings in Christianity. Why? Because it proves that God takes freedom seriously. If every sin were mortal, mercy would feel impossible. If no sin were mortal, love would become meaningless. The distinction exists because God respects the difference between weakness and rejection. Venial sin acknowledges human fragility. Mortal sin acknowledges human freedom. This means God does not treat every failure as betrayal. He understands struggle. He understands confusion. He understands growth. But he also honors real choice. This is why confession is not humiliation. It is restoration. It is not about being good enough. It is about coming back to life. Many people fear God because they misunderstand sin. But the Church's teaching actually removes fear. It tells you when you are wounded, when you are separated, and how to return. Clearly, safely, and honestly. There is no guessing. There is no anxiety trap. God is not hiding the rules. He is showing the path back. And that is why this teaching exists. Not to control you, but to keep your soul alive. If this explanation brought clarity instead of fear, remember this: God never asked you to walk in confusion. He never wanted you guessing whether you were close to Him or far away. Understanding sin is not about becoming perfect. It's about knowing where life is still flowing and where it needs to be restored. Many people live anxious because no one explains these things clearly. Clarity is rare, and when it helps you, it usually helps someone else too. If this answered a question you've quietly carried, pass it on to someone who might be struggling with the same confusion. And if you want calm, honest explanations about faith without fear or exaggeration, staying connected here will make sense to you. You didn't come across this by accident, and this understanding is not meant to stop here.